Hello, I'm Casey Dinges, Senior Managing Director for the American Society of Civil Engineers. Thanks for joining us today for a discussion on nonverbal communications. My guest is Brock Berry, an Associate Professor and Mechanics Group Director at West Point's Department of Civil and Mechanical Engineering. We all know that communication skills are important in the workplace, but many people think that just means speaking and writing. Why should we also understand nonverbal communication?
Well, Casey, today's civil engineers are working in larger, more diverse, and more geographically spread out teams than ever before. When you stop and think about our primary means of communication on a day-to-day basis, those are mostly email and phone conversations. Those conversations between your coworkers, your clients, the audience, the general public, whoever it may be. Nowadays, we tend to do less and less in person and more electronically. And if we are limited in the amount of communication or the way that we communicate to just electronic means, we're missing out on a big part of the conversation. We're missing out on that nonverbal communication and the important parts of the message that are encapsulated in that nonverbal communication.
How much of communication is actually nonverbal?
There's a number of studies that are out that would suggest numbers anywhere between 80% and 95% of one-on-one communication like we're doing here is going to be actually nonverbal. And when you stop and think, if we miss out on that, how much of the conversation are you really missing out on if we're strictly limited to relying on communication methods that don't allow us to capitalize on the nonverbal?
So I can keep my mouth shut and communicate quite effectively.
You're doing it right now.
What are the key elements to understanding nonverbal communication?
So there's a number of aspects of nonverbal that people like to think about in certain chunks, if you will. A lot of different publications refer to them as the C's. First one is context. The idea of, is nonverbal in one context appropriate and yet not appropriate in a different context? What happens on the sidelines of any sporting event? Pretty common when you do a great job in football, somebody's going to slap you on the backside or maybe across the helmet. That's actually considered to be an appropriate nonverbal feedback in that context. But now we bring that experience into the boardroom, and clearly that's not appropriate in our professional environments. The next one is congruency. The idea of, does the verbal and nonverbal messages actually match up? The best example for that, and we've all seen it, is the individual who stands in front of a group at a podium, and they're there to tell you about how excited they are to speak, but yet they're speaking to their shoes. The only eye contact they're making with is the floor. When you see a disconnect or lack of congruency between the nonverbal and verbal, particularly in a workplace environment, usually that's a red flag that's an opening you need to speak with somebody a little bit further. The next one is consistency. The idea of being able to pick up on somebody's nonverbal and interpreting it correctly. Many of us think we may be picking up on a message in particular and only to realize that we're off base. You need to know an individual and know them very well before you can judge them. The new person in your office space may seem like they're really excited to be there, but they may actually just drink a lot of caffeine in the morning. And until you know them at that level to be able to judge them and have an idea of what there is consistency relative to their nonverbal. The next one I like to talk about is culture. And culture is fascinating when it comes to nonverbal. There's so many things about the way that we both project nonverbal and the way we interpret nonverbal that are much about our culture and the way we were raised. And certainly in our diverse groups that we work with as engineers, we need to be prepared to understand the differences in the cultural projections and interpretations of nonverbal.
Brock, what advice would you give to a young engineer in the workforce and how to apply these nonverbal skills?
If there's one bit of advice I would give to a young engineer, you want to be able to communicate positive nonverbal. That is, when you first meet that person, any person, coworker, client, so on, give them a solid handshake and look them in the eyes. Follow it up with a nice smile, and they're going to remember you in a positive manner. That first interaction, that first nonverbal interaction is awfully important in what it is we're communicating. And if you're communicating with the limp handshake, that's not the message you want to get across.
That's good advice. How might being able to interpret nonverbal communications help you in your engineering career?
So again, the idea that we are now living in this digital age where we are relying on nonverbal communication methods, the idea of the email and so on, we need to be able to pick up on any opportunity beyond just those environments. So certainly with email, we're just restricted too much. But if you get somebody on the phone and now you're listening to their voice, and if you can listen for that inflection in their voice and understand how confident are they in the things they're saying at any given time, just by listening into those specific nonverbal cues that are actually embedded in and are utilized. We use these on a regular basis without even realizing it. To be able to pick up on some of those, to the extent that we are limited to talking on the phone, you can pick up on quite a bit on what an individual is saying, as well as, you know, maybe it is somebody in your office and, hey, I want to know, hey, Nancy, how much money's left in the Johnson account? I need to bill some time against that. Mm-hmm. And the response is 10,000? Mm-hmm. Well, that response had a question mark on the end if we listen real close. Right. So you're looking for that pitch, you're looking for the intonation, and to be able to pick up on that and realize that maybe the number you just got didn't come with a whole lot of confidence. So being able to go beyond just the regular day-to-day verbal connections and picking up and being more in tune with what's being communicated.
Brock, thank you for joining me today for a very enlightening conversation about nonverbal communication. For more information on ASCE's Interchange program, visit asce.org/interchange. Thanks for tuning in today. We'll see you next time on the ASCE Interchange.